My name is Edith, and for 6 years, my world was a tavern called the Gilded Cage. It was a place where dreams were ground into the grime on the floor, a place where hope was a currency no one could afford. I sold flowers there, wilted blossoms for men with withered souls, and I never, not for a moment, imagined that the silent, brooding man I saw as just another shadow in the corner would one day burn it all to the ground. He didn't do it for justice. Not really. He did it for me. It's a strange thing to be the reason a man starts a war, especially when you're just a girl who wanted nothing more than a small patch of earth to grow a garden. The path from a forgotten orphan to the catalyst for a lord's crusade was paved with more fear and sorrow than I care to remember, but it was also the path that led me to freedom. What would you do if the only person who saw the real you was the most dangerous man you'd ever met? Before I dive into how a simple flower girl became entangled in the fate of a city's underworld, I want to say hello to everyone watching. Let me know where you're from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you've ever felt trapped, like a bird in a cage, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the most difficult stories are the ones most worth telling. My life began not with a loving family, but with the cold, impersonal stone of the city orphanage. I was a foundling, left on the steps, with nothing but a blanket and a name pinned to the fabric. Edith. The orphanage was a place of rules and routines, of thin blankets and thinner soup. It wasn't cruel, not in the way the stories depict, but it was devoid of warmth. We were numbers, mouths to feed, bodies to clothe, until we were old enough to be put to work. My only solace was a tiny, cracked window box outside the dormitory. While other children fought over toys or scraps of food, I treasured the seeds I managed to find. A dandelion fluff caught on the wind, a fallen seed from a passing merchant's cart. I would coax them to life in that little box, my secret patch of magic in a world of gray. Those first fragile stems, that first stubborn bloom, it was the only beauty I knew, the only thing that felt truly mine. When I turned 16, my time was up. The matron, a woman with a perpetually weary face, informed me that a position had been found. A tavern owner needed a girl to sell flowers to his patrons. The Gilded Cage, she had called it. It sounded almost beautiful. The reality was anything but. The Gilded Cage was the festering heart of the city's underbelly, owned and operated by a man named Silas Thorne. They called him the vulture behind his back, a name he had more than earned. He was a predator who perched over the city's forgotten, picking them clean. He took in orphans like me, runaways, people with nowhere else to turn, and he shackled them with debts they could never repay. My debt was for my room and board, a cot in a damp, shared cellar, and 2 meals a day that were barely better than the orphanage gruel. To pay it off, I was given a basket of cheap, often wilting flowers and pushed onto the tavern floor each night. The air in the cage was a thick soup of stale ale, sweat, cheap perfume, and desperation. It was loud, a constant cacophony of rough laughter, angry shouts, and the mournful groan of a badly played fiddle. Men with cruel eyes and heavy hands would leer at me, their fingers brushing mine for a moment too long when they took a flower. In those first few weeks, I cried myself to sleep every night, the grime of that place clinging to me like a second skin. But Thorne's one rule was absolute. You never showed weakness on his floor. Tears were a liability, a vulnerability he would exploit without a second thought. So I learned to build a wall inside myself. I perfected a small, empty smile. I learned to meet their gazes without really seeing them, to navigate the crowded room like a ghost, my basket a shield against their advances. I was his little songbird, he would say, his voice a greasy caress that made my skin crawl. So pure, so untouched, good for business. He saw my innocence not as something to be protected, but as a commodity, a novelty for his hardened patrons to gawk at. He dressed me in a simple white dress, a stark contrast to the dark, sordid surroundings, ensuring I stood out. I was a prop, a piece of living decoration in his theater of sin. My only escape remained the same as it had always been. On the roof of the tenement building where we were housed, I found a collection of old, cracked pots. I would save every spare copper I was sometimes tossed as a pitying tip, not for food, but for soil and seeds from the market. I created a tiny secret garden on that rooftop, a riot of determined life clinging to existence against all odds. I would spend hours up there, my hands in the dirt, tending to my brave little flowers. It was the only place I could breathe, the only place the stench of the tavern didn't reach. It was my reminder that even in the darkest, most desolate places, something beautiful could still grow. And it was there I cultivated the flowers I would sell, my own flowers, nurtured with my own hands. They were more vibrant, more alive than the sad, half-dead things Thorn usually provided. It was a small act of rebellion, a secret I guarded with my life. My flowers, my garden. They were the proof that Silas Thorn did not own all of me. He owned my time, my labor, my freedom, but he did not own my heart. That I kept for myself, hidden away on a rooftop, surrounded by blooms. Lord Damian Blackwood surveyed the map of the city's wharf district, spread across the polished mahogany of his desk. His study was a fortress of order and silence, a stark contrast to the chaos he was about to immerse himself in. For 6 months, his entire existence had been dedicated to one goal: the complete and utter annihilation of Silas Thorn's criminal empire. This was not just a matter of civic duty for the clandestine Lord Warden of the city. It was personal. Years ago, Thorn, then a low-level smuggler, had been responsible for a warehouse fire meant to destroy evidence. The fire had spread, consuming a nearby tenement and taking with it the family of Damien's most trusted captain of the wardens. The captain had been like a father to him. Justice had never been served. Thorn had slipped through the net, using his ill-gotten gains to build a fortress of corruption around himself. The gilded cage as his throne room. Damien's jaw was tight, his gray eyes cold as winter stone. He was a man accustomed to control, to moving pieces on a board with calculated precision. He would go into the cage himself, disguised as Kale, a mercenary for hire, a man with no allegiances and a thirst for coin. He would observe, identify the key players, map the flow of coin and contraband, and when the time was right, he would strike, cutting the head from the snake. The plan was cold, efficient, and clean. There was no room for emotion, no space for distraction. His first night in the gilded cage was a sensory assault. The grime was palpable, the desperation a tangible thing in the air. As Kale, he was a different man. His posture was slouched, his face set in a permanent scowl, his fine clothing replaced with worn leather and steel. He took a booth in the darkest corner, a spot that offered a clear view of the entire room, and ordered a cheap ale. He let the noise wash over him, his eyes scanning, cataloging, assessing. He saw Thorn holding court like a king on a throne of rotting wood. He saw the nervous energy of smugglers, the dull-eyed resignation of the indentured workers, the false bravado of petty thugs. It was exactly the cesspool he had expected. And then he saw her. A girl in a simple white dress, moving through the morass with a basket of flowers. She was like a single pale moonbeam in a starless night. He watched her, his initial assessment clinical. She was a tool, another of Thorn's acquisitions, likely broken and complicit. He dismissed her from his thoughts, turning his attention back to Thorn's lieutenants. She was irrelevant to his mission. An hour later, a commotion broke out near the bar. A burly, drunken merchant, his face flushed with ale and entitlement, had cornered the flower girl. He'd grabbed her wrist, his voice a low, threatening growl. "Come on, pretty little thing. A flower's not all I want to buy from you tonight." The girl, Edith, he would later learn her name was, didn't scream or cry. She simply stood still, her body rigid, her face pale, but her eyes steady. "My flowers are all I have to sell, sir," she said, her voice quiet but clear, a tiny bell ringing in the din. Kale's hand instinctively went to the hilt of the dagger hidden beneath his tunic. He started to rise. This was the kind of casual brutality that festered in places like this, the very thing he was here to eradicate. But before he could take a step, one of Thorne's enforcers, a mountain of a man named Grigg, lumbered over. Kale expected him to join the merchant, to laugh and encourage him. Instead, Grigg grabbed the merchant by the collar and lifted him effortlessly. "The boss says no one touches the merchandise," Grigg snarled, his voice a gravelly rumble. He shoved the merchant away, who stumbled back, muttering curses. Grigg then turned to Edith, his expression not of concern, but of stern ownership. "Get back to work. You're attracting the wrong kind of attention." He wasn't protecting her, he was protecting his master's asset. Edith simply nodded, rubbing her wrist where red marks were already forming. She took a deep breath, the mask of placid neutrality sliding back over her features, and continued on her route as if nothing had happened. Damien sat back down, a strange, unfamiliar feeling stirring in his chest. It was admiration. He had seen soldiers break under less pressure. This girl, this child, possessed a core of steel he hadn't anticipated. She was not broken, she was enduring, she was resilient. He watched her for the rest of the night, seeing her in a new light. He noticed the small things, the way she carefully rearranged her flowers after each sale to keep the basket looking full, the imperceptible flinch when a man's voice was raised too loud, the way her eyes would sometimes drift towards the grimy windows, as if searching for a patch of sky. When she finally approached his table, her basket nearly empty, he was ready. "How much for a flower?" he asked, his voice the gruff rasp of Cadiel the mercenary. "2 coppers, sir," she replied, not quite meeting his eyes. He tossed 4 onto the table. "I'll take the white rose." Her eyes flickered up to his for a second, a flicker of surprise at the extra coin, before she quickly looked down again. She selected the single perfect white rose from her basket and handed it to him. Her fingers were cold as they brushed against his. He watched her walk away, the small extra payment clutched in her hand. That night, his mission log contained a new unexpected entry. Subject: Flower Girl. Name unknown. Appears to be an indentured servant to Thorne. Not complicit. Possesses an unusual degree of fortitude. Asset or liability. Unknown. Kale became a fixture in the corner booth. Every night he was there, a silent observer, nursing a single ale for hours. And every night he bought a single white rose from Edith, always paying double. He never tried to make conversation beyond the transaction, but his eyes followed her. He was a shadow, a constant silent presence in her nightly ordeal. He learned so much just by watching. He saw how Thorne would count her earnings at the end of the night, his lips curling in a sneer if he felt the take was too small. He saw the brief, stolen moments of camaraderie she shared with a young boy who worked in the kitchen, slipping him a piece of bread from her own meager meal when she thought no one was looking. He saw her tending to a pigeon with a broken wing in the back alley, creating a small splint for it with a twig and a scrap of her own dress. Each small act of kindness was a quiet defiance, a testament to the light within her that this place could not extinguish. One evening, Thorne decided to make an example of someone. A serving girl had accidentally spilled a drink on a wealthy patron. Thorne didn't yell, he didn't shout. He walked over to her, a chillingly calm smile on his face, and backhanded her so hard she fell to the floor, her lips split open. The tavern went silent. "Carelessness costs me money," Thorne said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over his terrified employees. "Let that be a lesson to all of you. Everything in this establishment, including you, belongs to me, and I do not tolerate damage to my property." Edith, who was standing nearby, flinched violently at the sound of the slap, but she didn't look away. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides, her knuckles white. As Thorne walked away, she was the first to move. She knelt beside the crying girl, helping her up and pressing a small clean cloth from her apron to the girl's bleeding lip. She whispered something to her, a word of comfort, an act of compassion in a place utterly devoid of it. Damien watched from his booth, his heart a cold, hard knot of fury in his chest. This was what he was fighting. this casual soul-crushing cruelty, and he saw Edith, not as a victim, but as a warrior in her own right, fighting back not with fists, but with a relentless, unbreakable goodness. The extra coppers he gave her, he realized, were not just for her. He saw her use them to buy a healing salve for the beaten girl, to buy extra food for the kitchen boy, to buy seeds from a market vendor. She was a secret conduit of hope in this hopeless place. Back in the sterile quiet of his manor, Damien stared at the single white rose from that night, now in a crystal vase on his desk. It stood in stark contrast to the maps and charts of criminal enterprises. He had come here for vengeance, for a cold and calculated justice. But looking at that flower, he knew the mission had irrevocably changed. The strategic lines on the map blurred, replaced by the image of a girl with defiant eyes and hands stained with dirt from a hidden garden. Dismantling Thorne's network was still the goal, but ensuring Edith's survival, her freedom, had just become the absolute non-negotiable priority. He would not allow that light of hers to be extinguished. He would tear this place down to its foundations if he had to, but he would get her out. The cage was going to be broken, and he would make damn sure the songbird flew free. The nightly ritual of the white rose continued, but something shifted between them. The silence, once a barrier, became a space of shared understanding. Quail, the grim mercenary, began to unbend just for her. He started to ask questions, his voice a low rumble that was hers alone in the noisy tavern. "Where do you find flowers like this in the city?" he asked one night, gesturing with the rose. Her eyes lit up for a moment, a genuine spark that transformed her face. "I grow them," she said, her voice barely a whisper, as if sharing a sacred secret. "On the roof. It's quiet up there." He could picture it instantly, a small, defiant garden against a backdrop of urban decay. It was the most beautiful and heartbreaking image he could imagine. "You have a gift," he said, the words feeling inadequate. She gave him a small, true smile for the first time, a radiant thing that made his breath catch. "They're just flowers," she demurred, but her pride was evident. That small admission, that glimpse into her secret world, forged a bond that felt more real than anything else in the gilded cage. Thorne, ever watchful, did not miss the change. The vulture's eyes saw everything, and he saw the way the silent mercenary in the corner looked at his flower girl. Cale was a mystery, a man who spent money but asked for nothing, and Thorne's paranoia, the very trait that had kept him alive this long, began to prickle. He decided to test them both. One evening, as Edith made her rounds, Thorne intercepted her. He put a heavy arm around her shoulders, his fingers digging into her arm. "My little songbird," he oozed, his breath smelling of sour wine. "Our quiet friend in the corner seems to enjoy your company. Why don't you go and provide him with some more of it? Sit with him. Keep his glass full. Be charming." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order, layered with menace. The unspoken threat was clear. Please him, or else. Edith felt a cold dread wash over her. To be singled out, to be forced to sit with a patron, was a step closer to a fate she desperately feared. Her legs felt like lead as she walked towards Cale's booth, a pitcher of ale in her trembling hands. When she reached the table, she could barely speak. "Mr. Thorne, he sent me," she stammered, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. Cale looked from her pale face to Thorne, who was watching them with a smug, proprietary smirk. He understood immediately. This was a power play. He gestured to the seat opposite him. "Sit," he said, his voice flat, betraying none of the rage simmering beneath the surface. Edith slid into the booth, perching on the edge of the seat as if ready to bolt. She poured him a drink with a shaky hand. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the weight of Thorne's gaze heavy upon them. Cale leaned forward slightly, creating a small pocket of intimacy, shielding her from the rest of the room. "He can't hear us," he said softly. "Look at me, Edith." Hesitantly, she lifted her gaze to his. His eyes weren't cold like they usually were. They held a deep, steady warmth that was more terrifying than any threat, because it felt like hope. "You're afraid," he stated. It wasn't a question. She could only nod, a tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. "What do you dream of?" he asked, the question so unexpected it startled her. Dreams were a luxury she hadn't allowed herself in years. "When you look out that window, what do you see?" She thought of her rooftop, of the sky, of the world beyond the suffocating walls of the cage. "A garden," she whispered, the word tasting of freedom on her tongue. "Just a small house, somewhere quiet, with a big garden where I can have my hands in the dirt all day, where nothing has to be a secret. And no one can tell me what to do." Her voice broke on the last words. He listened, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen. For the first time in her life, he didn't offer empty platitudes or false promises. He simply said, "A garden is a good dream to have, hold on to it." It was enough. For the rest of the hour she was forced to sit there. He steered the conversation to safe, neutral topics: the types of flowers, the changing seasons, the taste of the ale. He built a small temporary sanctuary for her at that table, a shield of words against the darkness. When Thorne finally grew bored and waved her away, she felt as though she were leaving a different world and re-entering the nightmare. The delicate balance of Damien's operation shattered 3 nights later. One of his inside sources, a disgruntled bookkeeper named Finn, was caught. Thorne was merciless. Finn's screams echoed from the cellar for hours before finally falling silent. The next day, his body was found floating in the wharf. Thorne had sent a message. The network was tightening, the vulture circling his prey, culling any hint of betrayal. Damien knew his time was running out. Thorne was spooked. He would be moving his operations, hiding his assets, and becoming even more unpredictable. Edith was in more danger than ever. A panicked animal was the most dangerous kind, and Thorne was now cornered. The raid had to happen now. The careful, methodical dismantling he had planned was no longer an option. This would have to be a swift, decisive strike, but his primary objective remained. He couldn't just storm the place. She could be killed in the chaos, or worse, taken as a hostage. He had to get her out first, or at the very least, give her a warning, a way to survive the coming storm. The following night, he entered the cage. The atmosphere was thick with fear. The workers moved with a frightened, robotic precision, their eyes downcast. Thorne was nowhere to be seen, but his presence felt heavier than ever. Edith was pale, her movements jerky. When she came to his table, she looked like a ghost. He bought his rose as usual, pressing the coins into her palm. But this time, something else was hidden among them. It was small, cool, and smooth. Her fingers closed around it. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a tiny wren poised for flight. She looked at him, her eyes wide with confusion. He leaned in close, his voice a bare whisper against the tavern's noise. "Tomorrow night, there will be chaos. When the cage door opens, the bird must fly. Find a way to the back alley. Stay low, stay hidden. Do you understand?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't understand, not really, but she saw the deadly seriousness in his eyes. This was not the mercenary Kale speaking. This was someone else, someone with authority and a purpose that went far beyond this filthy tavern. She clutched the wooden bird, its polished wood a strange comfort in her trembling hand. She gave him a single, sharp nod. "Be ready," he said, his gaze holding hers for a moment longer. Then he stood up and walked out of the gilded cage, leaving her alone with a secret, a warning, and a terrifying, fragile flicker of hope. The world was about to break, and he was trusting her to fly. The next night, the air in the gilded cage was electric, humming with a nervous energy that was different from the usual nightly tension. Thorne was present, surrounded by his most dangerous-looking lieutenants. A deal was going down. Edith could feel it. A group of richly dressed merchants, their faces slick with sweat despite the evening chill, huddled with Thorne at his main table, paranoia radiating from them in waves. Edith moved through the room on autopilot, her body performing the familiar motions of selling flowers while her mind raced. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every loud laugh made her jump. Her hand kept straying to her apron pocket, to the smooth, solid shape of the wooden wren. When the cage door opens, the bird must fly. Kale's words echoed in her head. She scanned the tavern, her eyes searching for his familiar form in the corner booth, but it remained empty. A cold knot of despair began to form in her stomach. Had she imagined it? Was it a cruel joke? Had he abandoned her? Thorne's mood was fouler than she had ever seen it. He barked an order at her to bring more wine, and when she was a second too slow, he grabbed her arm, his fingers like a vice. "Move, you useless girl," he hissed, his eyes crazed. "Tonight of all nights, you will be perfect." She scurried away, the hope that had sustained her for the past 24 hours beginning to crumble into dust. Then it happened. The main doors didn't just open, they exploded inward, blasted off their hinges by a force that shook the entire building. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that was followed by a split second of stunned silence, and then pandemonium. Men in dark, functional armor, their faces obscured by steel helmets, swarmed into the tavern. They moved with a terrifying, disciplined efficiency, their movements a blur of black leather and gleaming steel. They were the city wardens, the semi-mythical enforcers of the law that the city's underbelly spoke of in fearful whispers. Chaos erupted, men shouted, screamed, and drew weapons. Tables were overturned, bottles shattered, and the air filled with the sounds of struggle and the clang of steel on steel. Edith was thrown to the floor in the initial surge. She scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the wall behind the bar, making herself as small as possible. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the chaos Kale had promised. The cage door was being blasted open. Thorne, for all his bluster, was a cornered rat. He saw his escape routes cut off, his men being systematically and brutally subdued. His eyes, wild and desperate, scanned the room for any advantage, any leverage, and then they landed on her. He lunged across the room, shoving aside one of his own men, and grabbed Edith, hauling her to her feet. The cold, sharp edge of a dagger pressed against her throat before she could even draw a breath to scream. "Back off." Thorne roared, his voice a ragged shriek of fury and fear. He dragged her into the center of the room, using her body as a shield. "Everybody back off, or the songbird gets her throat cut." "I mean it." The disciplined advance of the wardens halted. They formed a loose circle around them, their weapons ready. Edith could feel Thorne's body trembling with adrenaline behind her, his arm a crushing band across her chest. The sharp point of the knife pricked her skin. A figure detached itself from the ranks of the wardens. He was taller than the others, his movements fluid and confident. He radiated an aura of absolute authority. He stopped a dozen feet away, and with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached up and removed his helmet. Edith's breath hitched in a painful gasp. It was Cole, but it wasn't Cole. The scowl was gone, the weary slouch replaced by a ramrod's straight posture of command. His eyes, no longer shadowed and hooded, were clear, sharp, and blazing with a cold fury. This was a lord, a commander, a man born to power. Silas Thorne's jaw dropped, his face a mask of utter disbelief. "You," he stammered, his bravado cracking. "The merc Blackwood, you're Lord Damien Blackwood." Damien's eyes never left Thorne, but Edith felt his gaze on her, a silent message of reassurance. "It's over, Thorne," Damien said, his voice ringing with the clarity of a death knell. "Let her go. There's nowhere for you to run." Thorne let out a crazed, high-pitched laugh. "Over? It's not over until I gut you, you noble bastard. You think I didn't know you were sniffing around? I knew something was wrong with you, and you care about this one, don't you?" He pressed the blade harder against Edith's throat, a tiny bead of blood welling up. "You want your precious little stray, Blackwood? Come and get her." In that moment, something inside Edith snapped. The years of fear, of forced submission, of quiet endurance coalesced into a single white-hot point of defiance. She was not a stray. She was not a prop. She was not his merchandise. She was the girl who grew flowers on a rooftop in hell. She was the girl who held a small wooden bird in her pocket. The bird must fly. With a surge of adrenaline that banished all fear, she acted. She drove the heel of her worn boot down, hard, onto Thorne's instep. He roared in pain and surprise, his focus shattering for a barest fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her elbow backwards with all her might, connecting solidly with his ribs. His grip loosened, the arm around her chest slackening as he gasped for air. It was the only opening Damien required. He moved faster than she thought possible, a blur of dark motion. He wasn't aiming for Thorne, he was aiming for the weapon, a sharp, precise strike to Thorne's wrist, a twist, and the dagger clattered harmlessly to the floor. In the same fluid movement, Damien shoved Edith behind him, putting his own body between her and the now disarmed Thorne. Two wardens surged forward, slamming Thorne to the ground and binding his hands before he could even process what had happened. It was over. The fight had gone out of the room. The gilded cage had fallen. Amidst the wreckage and the groans of the wounded, Damien turned to Edith, the commander, the lord, the warrior. All of it melted away, leaving only the man from the corner booth. He gently reached out, his gloved fingers brushing the tear tracks on her cheek, his touch surprisingly soft. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and filled with a concern that was achingly real. She shook her head, unable to find her voice. She was trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the violent, shocking release of it. He took off his own heavy cloak, the insignia of the Lord Warden gleaming on the clasp, and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm and heavy, smelling of cold night air and steel and safety. He leaned in close, his voice for her ears alone. "The cage is open, Edith," he said softly. "Let's go home." He took her hand and led her out of the ruins of her prison, stepping over the threshold and into the clean, cold air of a world she had only ever dreamed of. The journey to his manor was a blur. She remembered the cobblestones passing under the wheels of a fine carriage and the city lights smearing into streaks of gold and silver. Damien sat across from her, his silence a comforting presence, not an intimidating one. When they arrived, the manor was a palace from a fairy tale, all towering stone and windows blazing with warm light. It was so vast, so clean, it felt like another planet compared to the cramped, filthy world she had always known. A woman with kind eyes and silver hair, who introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, met them at the door. She led Edith upstairs to a room that was larger than the entire cellar she had shared with three other girls. There was a bed with linens so white they hurt to look at, a fireplace with a gentle flame already crackling, and a steaming bath waiting for her. Mrs. Gable helped her out of the simple white dress, now torn and stained, and laid out a soft woolen nightgown. She treated Edith with a gentle deference that was utterly foreign, calling her Miss and ensuring she had everything she needed before leaving her in peace. Soaking in the hot, scented water, Edith scrubbed at her skin, trying to wash away more than just the grime of the tavern. She was trying to wash away the memory of Thorne's touch, the scent of stale ale, the feeling of being constantly watched and judged. But the silence was the most disorienting thing of all. For 6 years her life had been a relentless assault of noise. The quiet of this room was so profound it felt loud, pressing in on her. When she finally climbed into the impossibly soft bed, sleep did not come easily. She was haunted by nightmares of the raid, of Thorne's face, of the glint of the knife, but woven into the fear was the image of Damien's face when he took off his helmet, and the feel of his cloak around her shoulders. She woke up tangled in the sheets, her heart pounding, half expecting to find herself back in her damp cellar cot. It took a moment for her to remember where she was, to realize that the light streaming through the large window was real, and that she was safe. She was free. The thought was so immense, so overwhelming, it was terrifying. Freedom was a country she had never visited, and she had no map. The next day, she wandered the manor like a ghost, touching the smooth wood of the banisters, staring at the portraits of stern-faced ancestors on the walls. She felt small and out of place, a street sparrow that had accidentally flown into a king's castle. She eventually found her way to a vast greenhouse at the back of the manor, a cathedral of glass and steel, filled with the most extraordinary plants and flowers she had ever seen. The air was warm and humid, rich with the smell of damp earth and blooming blossoms. It felt like coming home. She was tracing the velvety petal of a deep purple orchid when Damien found her. He wasn't wearing his armor or his fine lordly clothes, but a simple tunic and trousers. He looked younger, less burdened. He stood for a moment, simply watching her. "I see you found the one place you might feel comfortable," he said gently. She turned, her hands dropping to her sides. "It's beautiful, my mother's," he explained. "She loved it. I've neglected it since she passed." He walked closer, his expression serious. "Edith, I owe you an explanation and an apology. I put you in terrible danger." He told her everything then, about his real identity as Lord Warden, the secret arm of the city's justice, about the history with Thorn, the fire, the death of his mentor's family, the long, cold quest for vengeance. He explained the Kale persona, the months of infiltration. "My mission was simple," he said, his voice laced with self-reproach. "Gather intelligence, identify the network, and destroy it. You were never supposed to be a part of it. At first, I saw you as just another piece on the board, another victim of that place." He paused, looking away from her and at the vibrant flowers around them. "But I was wrong. I watched you. I saw your strength, your kindness in a place that should have stamped it out of you. You weren't a victim. You were a survivor. You were light, and my mission changed. It stopped being about justice for the past. It became about securing a future for you. Rescuing you became more important than anything else. I am sorry for the fear I caused you, and for the deception. I hope in time, you can forgive me." She listened, her heart a confusing mix of emotions. Gratitude, certainly, awe at the scale of the world he inhabited, but also a strange sense of loss. The quiet, watchful mercenary who had been her silent protector was gone, replaced by this powerful, important lord. She looked at her own hands, the nails still rimmed with a faint line of dirt that no amount of scrubbing could remove. They were the hands of a girl who worked for a living, who grew things in the earth. What did a lord want with a girl like her, other than to ease his conscience by playing the hero? "There is nothing to forgive, my lord," she said, her voice quiet. "You saved my life." "Damien," he corrected her gently. "My name is Damien." She looked around the magnificent greenhouse, and her eyes fell upon a small, forgotten corner. It was cluttered with old, broken pots and bags of hardened soil, but a patch of bright sunlight fell upon it from the glass roof above. An idea, fragile and new, began to take root in her mind. She wasn't just a girl who had been saved. She was a girl who knew how to make things grow. Perhaps, even here, she could find a patch of earth to call her own. The weeks that followed were a time of quiet healing. Edith found a steady rhythm in the peaceful halls of Blackwood Manor. Mrs. Gable, seeing the lost look in the girl's eyes, took her under her wing. She taught Edith how to manage a household, not as a servant, but as a student. She showed her the ledgers, explained the ordering of supplies, taught her to read and write with a patience Edith had never known. For the first time, Edith felt like she was learning skills for a future, not just skills for survival, but her true sanctuary remained the greenhouse. With Damien's hesitant permission, she claimed the neglected corner as her own. She spent her days there, clearing the debris, mixing fresh soil, repairing the old clay pots. Her hands, once again, were plunged into the earth, and with each weed she pulled, with each seed she planted, she felt a piece of herself settling. She was no longer just the flower girl from the gilded cage. She was becoming the woman with the garden. She woke early each morning to tend to her burgeoning plants, and it was there, among the new life she was nurturing, that the ghosts of her past began to fade. Damien gave her space, but he was a constant, watchful presence. He would often find reasons to walk through the greenhouse, ostensibly to check on its structure, but he would always linger, watching her work. He saw the transformation, the way the fearful, haunted look in her eyes was slowly being replaced by a quiet confidence. The girl who had been afraid to meet his gaze in the tavern now looked up and offered him a genuine, easy smile when he entered. He was changing too. The cold, single-minded focus that had driven him for years was softening. The manor, once just a silent, empty monument to his family's legacy, began to feel like a home. He found himself looking forward to the moments he could steal away to the greenhouse, to the simple peace of watching Edith coax life from the soil. The silence between them was no longer the tense, watchful silence of the tavern, but a comfortable quiet, punctuated by her soft humming, or his questions about what she was planting. A few months after the raid, a summons arrived from the city magistrate. Silas Thorne and his key lieutenants were finally being brought to public trial. The magistrate requested Edith's testimony. A wave of the old fear washed over her. To face Thorne again, to speak of the horrors of the gilded cage in a formal court, it felt impossible. She told Damien she couldn't do it. "You don't have to," he said immediately, his face set with fierce protectiveness. "I will not force you. We have enough evidence without your testimony." But that night, Edith couldn't sleep. She thought of the other girls, of the kitchen boy, of all the forgotten souls Thorne had crushed under his heel. If she remained silent, she was letting fear win. She was still letting him control her. The next morning, she found Damien in his study. "I'll do it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will speak." On the day of the trial, Damien stood beside her. He did not treat her as a fragile victim, but as an equal. He walked with her into the courtroom, a silent pillar of support. When she took the stand, her heart hammered in her chest. She saw Thorne sitting between two guards, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with a hateful glare. For a moment she faltered. Then she looked at Damien, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. She took a deep breath and began to speak. She did not cry or shout. In a clear, steady voice, she told them everything. She spoke of the debt bondage, the fear, the casual cruelty, the story of the serving girl, the murder of Finn the bookkeeper. She painted a picture of life in the gilded cage with such simple, unadorned honesty that the entire courtroom was held in spellbound silence. She was no longer just a flower girl. She was a witness, and her voice, once a whisper, now rang with the undeniable power of truth. When she was finished, a profound silence hung in the air. She had not just condemned Silas Thorne, she had given a voice to all of his silent victims. Thorne was found guilty and sentenced to life in the bleakest prison in the kingdom. As they led him away, his eyes met Edith's one last time. There was no hatred in them now, only a look of defeated shock, the look of a monster who had finally been seen for what he was. Walking out of the courthouse and into the bright sunlight, Edith felt the last of her chains fall away. Life truly began to blossom. Her small corner of the greenhouse flourished, becoming a riot of color and scent, but it was more than just a hobby. Edith, with the skills Mrs. Gable had taught her, began to see a future. She started creating intricate floral arrangements, combining common flowers with the rare and exotic ones from the Blackwood collection. Her creations were unique, beautiful, and full of the life she had poured into them. At first, she simply used them to brighten the manor, but Damien, seeing her talent, arranged for a few of her arrangements to be displayed at a high society charity event. They were an instant sensation. The city's elite, accustomed to stuffy, formal bouquets, were captivated by the wild, natural beauty of her work. Orders began to pour in. Within a year, Edith had a thriving business, a small staff of girls she had hired from the very same orphanage she had come from, and a reputation as the city's most sought-after floral artist. She had her own money, her own name, her own purpose. She was no longer a rescued bird. She was a woman who had built her own nest, and it was a beautiful one. One perfect summer evening, Damien found her in the greenhouse, where she was finishing a magnificent arrangement of white roses for a wedding. The setting sun streamed through the glass panes, bathing the room in a warm, golden light. She had grown so much, the timid girl was gone, replaced by this confident, serene woman, her face glowing with purpose and peace. He had come here seeking vengeance, but he had found his salvation in this quiet girl and her garden. He realized he didn't want to imagine a single day at the manor without her in it. "You've created something amazing here, Edith," he said, his voice soft. "Not just the flowers. You've created a life." She turned to him, a gentle smile on her face. "You gave me the soil to plant it in," she replied. She snipped a single perfect white rose from a nearby bush, the descendant of the first strain she had cultivated on that lonely rooftop. She held it out to him. "For you." The simple gesture was laden with a world of meaning. He was no longer the buyer, the dark mercenary in the corner. He was the recipient of her gift, freely and lovingly given. He took the rose, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was electric, a current of unspoken feelings that had been growing between them for months. "Edith," he began, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "When I first went to that tavern, I thought I was the hunter, the one in control. I saw it as a gilded cage, and you as the songbird trapped inside. I thought my mission was to break the cage and set you free." He stepped closer, his gray eyes warm and full of a profound vulnerability. "But I was wrong. I was the one in a cage of duty, of vengeance, of loneliness. And you, with your quiet strength and your secret garden, you were the one who showed me the key. You freed me." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a love that felt as natural and as certain as the flowers growing around them. The Lord and the flower girl, the rescuer and the rescued, those were just stories. Here, in the golden light of the greenhouse, they were just Damien and Edith, and their future, which they would build together, was as bright and as full of promise as the garden she had cultivated from the ashes of her past. And so, from the ruins of a cage, I finally built my own garden. It took time, and it took facing the very monster who had imprisoned me, but every step was worth it. I learned that true strength isn't just about enduring the darkness, it's about having the courage to plant a seed and believe against all odds that it will one day find the sun. The scars of my past are still there, but they are part of my story, a reminder of the resilience I never knew I had. My greatest joy now is not just in my own success, but in giving other girls from that same orphanage the chance I never had, a chance to grow in a place of safety and encouragement. My life with Damien is one of peace and partnership, a love built not on a dramatic rescue, but on the quiet, steady work of two people helping each other heal and grow. I learned that your past does not have to define your future, and that even in the most toxic soil, the most beautiful things can bloom. What about you? Have you ever had to find the strength to grow in a difficult place? Share your story of resilience in the comments below. I read every single one, and they give me so much hope. Please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about overcoming the odds. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. Remember that your worth is not determined by the cage you're in, but by the garden you have the courage to grow inside yourself. I wish you all strength and so much hope.